So how does this mobile development as a service plan work? So to try and explain it, I'm going to create an application for Typeform. I used to be the CTO of Typeform, and one of the things we wanted to do there was to develop a mobile application, a fully native one. We never actually got to that because it was too expensive, or it was too much effort, and we weren't sure it was going to deliver for us what we needed. With Bravo, we can actually leverage the APIs that the Typeform provides to actually create a native mobile application for them really easily. And in this video, I'm going to go through how to do a very simple one. In this instance, it's just going to be a native mobile application that can allow you to look at your responses that you've had for your Typeforms, but by connecting to the Typeform systems and authenticating correctly. So how do we go about creating an application for Typeform in Bravo? Well, as they're listed here, there are really three steps. The first one is to kind of figure out what APIs I've got to help us think about exactly which ones we need to do the functionality that we ultimately want to provide the end user. The next step is then to take those APIs or think about the workflow and create the sort of design and user interface that will effectively work with those APIs to provide the functionality. And finally, the last step is to bring it all together in Bravo. And I'm going to go through each of these steps one at a time. So what do I mean by figure out APIs? Really what we're talking about here is understanding the connection of the APIs to the functionality and how you work through them to get to what you need to get done. So let's start with what Typeform has available. So if I flick to the Typeform developer portal, now Typeform has created a really good set of documentation for its APIs. And if we think about what we're trying to do, I mean, the goal of this application was to help a user look at what responses they've had for a Typeform. Now, the way that Typeform works, if you've used it, is that you start off with a list of workspaces. You then go from the workspaces to the list of forms, and then the forms, within the forms, you can get to the results. Now, the APIs that we would need to use for the Typeform instance is the create API actually helps with the workspace and the forms list. And then the response API actually has the data of the responses themselves. And so if we look into there, so look at the create API, you can see there's a retrieve workspaces URL here, and then there's a retrieve form URL here. So you can kind of start piecing it together. And then if we go back, we can look at the responses API, where you can get the data detail for each of the responses detail for each of the forms. So that's the core of the APIs that we need to have. The other part of this, which is important, is authentication. Now, authentication in Typeform, we use OAuth 2. And so now actually Bravo is pretty well set up for handling OAuth 2, so long as you know the various URL endpoints for doing the sort of setting up of the token and the scopes. And actually we have some defaults in Bravo to handle Typeform, so it makes it even easier. But authentication is an important piece to get right, and Bravo is pretty flexible at handling most of those situations. So if you've got, which APIs you need, and you've got them, understand how that works, and you've got the authentication set up, then you can put it all together. Now, what I have done, and what you can also do actually, if you control your own backend, is you can generate your own API definition, which makes the whole using Bravo much simpler. Now, I've created one in GitHub for Typeform as a Swagger file, and if I just go into it now, you can see all of the API definitions are here. So you can just download this file and import it directly into Bravo to set all the APIs up for you automatically, which is really helpful. So which makes the actual creation in Bravo much simpler. And as I said, if you've got the ability to generate this automatically, this Swagger file automatically, it means that in setting up of APIs in Bravo is very fast indeed. The next step in the process is to create the app design. using Figma or Adobe XD. Now for this example, I've created one in Figma. Now as you can see from this design here, we've basically looked at how the actual purpose application, which is to help people look at their results from Typeform, and to think about how they and to make that work with how the APIs work. So if you remember going back to the APIs, with Typeform, once you log in, you have to navigate through your workspaces to your form before you can get your data. And in the same way, we've done a similar setup here. So you log in from the login page, and you can see the annotations there for the top for page login of this screen. And then hitting the login button will go to the first workspaces, and you can, if I just put on prototyping briefly, you can see the flow. So we go from login, and then by marking this with the beginning of the flow, Bravo knows that after login to go to this first screen. And then once you in the workspaces, we just create a container. You can see here we've got this workspace is done as a container. So this will enable to tell Bravo that when we can connect this to an API, and it will then iterate through the results of the API, repeating this container. So that workspaces screen will have a list of the workspaces, and by clicking on that, it'll go through to the form, and this will pass the data onto the form, so it knows when it gets the form screen to do an API request for forms. And again, the form is a container, which means that when Bravo does the API request for forms, it will iterate through that container through and multiplying this element in the design, displaying all the different forms available. And then finally, when you click on that, it will go through to the summary screen, again passing in the form ID, which will enable the Bravo to call the form data and to be able to populate this data with the results from the APIs. So it's a fairly simple app, but by calling the APIs, it can make the design dynamic, which you'll see when we go to the next step, where we bring the data into Bravo and connect it to API, and then go on from there.
So now we have to create the application in Bravo. This consists really of 4 main steps. Importing the design we have, that we saw earlier, into Bravo. Then we have to set up the authentication to enable it to work securely with Typeform. Then we have to set up the APIs to connect to Typeform and pull the data from there. And finally, we have to bind the APIs to the design to bring it all together. And I'll go through each of these steps now. Right, going back to the design in Figma, here it is. What we need to do is to simply go to Share, copy the link, which copies the link to this design, and then go to Bravo Studio, which is here. We click on Create a New App. We simply paste in the URL for the design, and now Figma will go through. Now Bravo will connect to Figma, pull in the design, then how it navigates, the voice assets and text, and convert it into its own internal format. Okay, so now we have an app in Bravo, and we could test this straight away, although we have to do a couple of things first. So the app is all here, and as you can see, the screens are all as they were in Figma. Actually, at this point, we are able to go in and if we click on a screen, we could connect it to we can look at the elements, and this is the point where we connect to the APIs, but I'll do that at a later stage.
Now that we've got the design imported, the next piece we have to do is make sure it authenticates correctly with Typeform. Now, so to do that, in the apps screen, we have to go into Settings. We have to turn on OAuth 2. Now, fortunately, we've already preset a bunch of different setups, including Typeform. So we can pick up the Typeform setup. And just to show you, if we go to Advanced View, we can see that we've already got the different URLs in there. We just need to update the client secret and the client ID. So let me just get those. So first of all, we get the client ID here, and then I get the client secret.
Now these two bits of information, if you go to the Typeform help pages, they'll tell you how to set that up. Basically, every different application that connects to Typeform needs to have an ID and a secret to identify itself. So you'll have to do that yourself for your own account. Once that's in, the last piece is the scopes. Now we have a couple of scopes already set up down the bottom, as you can see here. What we need to add a couple more, because we need to look at both workspaces and responses. So I'm just going to add in the extra scopes we need, like so. And that is it. That should enable us. That's all the configuration we need to make Bravo connect to Typeform and authenticate securely. So saving that's saved, and then go back to the screens for us to look at the next step. Next, we need to import the APIs into Bravo to be able to collect the data from Typeform that we need. Now, to make this a bit easier, I've actually set up, as I mentioned, the API definition, which you can get from this URL. And go into Typeform, and there's a Swagger file there, which if we go into it, you can see, unless you get it raw, you can see it defines all of the APIs that we actually need for this particular application. Okay, so you can save that locally, then go back into Bravo, go to the collections, create a new collection, and then import. So we're going to call this Typeform responses, and then we're going, there it is, bring it in, and select all of them and continue. Right, so that's brought in all of our files, all of the API definitions, and we'll edit the collection. So you can see they're all listed here. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to authenticate. And so to do that, we want to use the OAuth 2. So we have to set this collection up to connect to the OAuth 2 settings we have for the app. So we use the OAuth 2 settings, and then we have to select the application that we want, which is this one. And that will join the two together. So now, if we wanted to test this, and let's just use this retrieve your own user API call, which just gets the details of the logged in user, and send that. So now it's asking me to log in. So by logging in, I will be able to get the token set up so I can then check all the other API requests we've just imported. So we do log in, and we go through the cycle. It knows my details for my login details. I accept that, and success. So now we go back to here, and if you see if I send it now I've done the login cycle. Now it's worked, and the API request has worked, and this is my test user in user ID. So we need to make a couple of other little changes to these ones. The actual API requests we need are the ones in bold. They're the ones that are actually going to be important for this application. So if we start in list workspaces, I'm just going to change this variable here to 200, just to simplify things a little bit. And then if we send it, you can see now I've brought in, this is a list of all of the workspaces, only one in this particular user. And I'm just going to get the ID of the workspace because we use it somewhere else. So that's set up the workspaces request. Now we want to set up the forms request. And if you see here, I'm just going to change again the page size to 200. And if you see, we've got a workspace ID. So what we can do here is set the test values. We're just going to remove the page size as test value, but the workspace ID, we're going to use the value I copied from the workspace request. So this will basically do this request using this test value workspace ID and send that, and that works now. And so that's brought in the number of all the forms. You see there's a couple of forms in this workspace, and we want to get an idea of one of the forms there. And we'll do the same thing again for the actual summary free data. So here is a form ID. So we go to test values, and here we just want to put in the form ID. Let's check that. Test values, form ID,
and we'll use the one we just created. We just put in, send that, and there it is. This is the data we get for the responses. So that means all those different things are working now. So we know that all the requests are working. The other quick change I'm going to do is, as we bring in the data from each of these different levels, we need to make sure that it's used by the next one. So in list workspaces, if you notice, when we make this request, we'll see that we've got this thing called ID. Now what we want to do is make it so we can reference it by the forms. And if you notice in the forms, the list of forms, we reference it as workspace ID. So we need to make sure the name of the data coming in from the workspaces, the IDs that come in, are in the same format as that next one. So if we do that by looking at editing this request response. So here, rather than items ID, we want to make that workspace ID, so we can use it at the next level down of the request. So that fixes that. And then we'll do the same thing with forms. So with forms, so it takes in a workspace ID, and then when you make the request, if you notice, it's got an ID, but if you notice in the summary data, it uses form ID. So what we need to do here is change the ID of the here to be form ID, so it fits in the next request down. Okay, so that sets all the authentications working, the requests are working. We've connected all the requests together so the IDs will flow through, and that should be all we need to do on the API side for now. The final step in building the app is to connect the API data to the design itself. So looking at the screens we've got here, obviously the login is already taken care of as part of our auth. We've got to connect the workspaces to the workspace API request, the forms to the form request, and then the summary data to the summary data request. So let's do that now. So let's start with the workspaces. So we go in there, we connect the workspace list to the Typeform responses collection. So that, and then we want to connect it to list of workspaces and then the item. So what this is doing is it's connecting the list to the actual API list that's coming back. And then once we've done that, we can go into the details. We can connect the workspace title to elements. So the workspace title would be the name, and then the number of forms is the forms count. Okay, and that's it for the workspaces screen. Then on the forms, similar process. We connect the form list to the Typeform responses collection, and then we want to connect list of forms and items to it's connected to the list of items, and then we want to update the elements. So obviously last updated, and the form title is title. Okay, so that sorts out those that screen. Then finally it's the summary, and here we don't have a list. So what we want to do is we want to connect all the different values together. So in the form summary, we don't do the list anymore. We just go straight to connecting the values. So we want to connect to type responses, and then form summary, and we want to connect it to average time, and we want to connect the completion rate, total visits, and unique visits. And then visit response count, there's the response count. And then we can also get the form title by retrieving the form and connecting it to title. So this is another API request. So that should get us all of the data that we need to do for this particular app.
Right, finally we can put everything together and look at the actual application, how it looks. So here is Bravo Vision. This is the previewer for Bravo to show the apps. So this is basically a view onto my phone so you can see what's happening. So I will open the app that I've created, which will appear if you log into Bravo Vision with your account. And this is now, so this is the app. So there is the tab app. This is the login screen. I click on login, and then we log in. We'll go through the auth process. Okay, so log in here, and I will just log in with my details. There we go. So now we log in, and obviously it needs to authorize me because with Typeform to validate that I get access to these things. And there we go, I'm in. So this is the workspace screen. I've got one workspace. You can see it's got 2 forms. I click on that and it will show the forms on the last update. And I click on one of the forms and it will give me the status. So this is all the data related to the forms that are based on that. So we built the entire application using APIs to work through and have a fully native application authenticating against using Auth2. So it's pretty easy to extend this, but you can see the power of Bravo. Once you have the APIs and from a simple design, you can get something working really rapidly indeed. Thanks.